Thank you for tuning in to the GSMC Basketball Podcast presented by the GSMC Sports Network. I am your host, Nelson, here on this very depressing Thursday afternoon. It's depressing if you are a Knicks fan, and if you're any New York relative, it is very depressing, and you'll find out why in the later segment, not this first segment, but it will be in the second segment on what I'll be talking about. But the first segment is going to be on Malachi Flynn's random 50-point game, as well as the rest of the other outstanding performances that happened yesterday night, because yesterday night there was a lot of very, outstanding performances from all sorts of players. And so I just thought, why not talk about defenses and offenses? Have they gotten better? Have they gotten worse? Because that's always, a topic of interest. Like every single time I open up a podcast, or every time I open up one of the clips from online, I always see all these old heads, or all these relatively older players who played in the league before. They're like, defenses have gone very soft this year. And I'm just sort of going to break that down and what I see and my personal opinions on it. Obviously, not trying to take credibility away from all of these other people, because they are players and they have played in that league, but the eye test, it's still there. So it's what they might see might not be it might be what they see, but they might also have some bias towards it. But I'm going to get into that a little bit more as I go into the first segment. The second segment is going to be particularly focusing on Bronny entering the transfer portal and the rumors around that, and as well as Julius Randle needing to undergo surgery. And that's why it is a depressing day if you're a Knicks fan, or if you're a fan of any New York team or any New York sports in general. And in the third segment, we're going to do our recap as usual. We also have our special fourth segment, so stay in tune for that fourth segment. I think it's a really good one, and you guys will enjoy it. But before I begin, I'd like to remind everybody to please use the link in the description and the link displayed below the ticker on every show segment to get your comments recognized. Once again, the link is GSMCPodcast.net. Really helps the show, makes the show much more interactive between myself and you guys, puts your comments directly in front of my screen. Once again, the link is GSMCPodcast.net. It's displayed below the ticker, as well as the link in the description. And with that out of the way, we can go right ahead and talk about Malachi Flynn's random 50-point game. Now, I say random because he's coming off the bench, and throughout his career, he's averaged only 4 points per game. So this is probably the most random 50-point game in NBA history, and the most recent random 50-point game that I can remember is when Eric Gordon when James Harden was out for Houston, just randomly decided to drop 50 on the Jazz. And that sort of, to me at least, that felt like the start of a bunch of random players just having these ridiculous games. Because Eric Gordon, he was coming off the bench, but in that game he was starting, and he's really he's a very good basketball player, and he was known to be a phenomenal basketball player before his time with Houston. But around the time when he was on Houston, he was primarily he was considered to be a role player, compared to the rest of the team that was where the offense was heavily reliant on James Harden and Chris Paul. He was seen as a role player in that system, and ever since he just randomly had this 50-point game, I've seen more role players just have more random 40-point, 50 points, and 30-point games than I would have normally. And it's sort of it's begged the question, has defense gotten better, or has defense gotten worse, or has offense gotten better, or is it just a combination of both? Because with this 50-point game, Malachi Flynn now has a better career high than players like Paul George, Manu Ginobili, Kevin Garnett, Magic Johnson, Kawhi Leonard, Chris Paul, and even Bill Russell. So the fact that I don't want to say random, but the fact that a bench player, yeah, that's the better word. The fact that a bench player was able to come out and score 50 in a game is literally unheard of. It's never happened in the history of basketball. And when people see that, the first thing that they could think of is, oh, well, the defense is so lazy in this league. It's like, obviously, like anyone can score 50 if they just have a good night. And that's sort of been the casual take when you look at all of these random 50-point games that some of these players have. Like, just last night, I'll list off all the dominant performances from last night. So you have Malachi Flynn's 50-point game. Devin Booker ended the game with 40 points and 8 assists. CJ McCollum ended the game with 36 points. Anthony Davis ended the game with 35 points and 18 rebounds. Jaren Jackson Jr. ended the game with 35 points and 3 steals. Kevin Durant ended the game with 32 points, 6 rebounds, and 7 assists. Paolo Banchero ended the game with 32 points. Jordan Poole ended the game with 29 points. Jalen Johnson ended the game with 28, 14, and 11 with 4 steals and 1 block for the Atlanta Hawks, so phenomenal game for him. Anthony Edwards ended the game with 28 points. Cam Thomas ended the game with 27. Kristaps Porzingis ended the game with 27 and 12. Pascal Siakam ended the game with 26. LeBron ended the game with 25, 7, and 9. Tatum ended with 24. Halliburton ended with 24. DeAndre Ayton ended with 24 and 16. Jaylen Brown ended with 23. Scoot ended with 22 and 10. Giannis ended with 21, 7, and 8, along with 5 blocks. And those were all the outstanding performances that I had written down. And when you look at that, like in hindsight, it's normal to think like, oh, the defense has sort of been relatively lackluster. And when you look at these games, like when you're just turning on the TV, it looks as if like the players, they aren't really trying as much on defense as they are on offense, because most of the time we see the corner three as a wide open shot. That's the shot that a lot of teams try to look for now in this league. If it's not a shot in the paint, then it's going to be a corner three. And we usually see defenses rather lazy to go and make that rotation and try to contest that jumper. And not to mention like the rest of how the NBA refs, I didn't mean to say refs, but how the refs sort of officiate the game. It's also impacted how we think the game actually is. So like, for example, the refs, now in the NBA, they give technical fouls for, it feels like, for anything. But back in the day, a technical foul back then required a lot more force than it would require now. So like a technical foul now, or even a flagrant foul now, it would require like, there's less of a requirement for a technical or a flagrant foul to be called. But back in the day, it would seem like, oh, that's just a common foul. Like the most common example is what the bad boy Pistons did to Michael Jordan, where it's like the stipulation around it is like, oh my God, every single time Michael Jordan went up, we knocked him to the ground. Like, you would think that they were just throwing haymakers at him, or they were just elbowing him every single time he would drive to the paint. And they would do that, but not every single time. Like, hand check, as much as they refused to admit it, hand checking was a thing back in the NBA, back when Michael Jordan was playing. There were several clips I can pull up where Michael Jordan gets, where there's a foul called on Jordan for hand checking, or there's a foul called on the defender for hand checking Michael Jordan. And the ref literally does this, and this is a symbol for hand checking in the referee handbook. So with all of that in mind, like with how like the thought process is that back then it was tougher and now it's like a little bit softer, that also like applies for the defenses and like the effort being put on defense. And I don't really understand that, because how is it like the players, they might have gotten soft, but like they might have gotten less aggressive. That's the proper word. It's not soft. They might have been less aggressive, but that's just because they're trying not to send the players to the free throw line. Because back then, if you send someone to the line, and chances are the only people that you'd send to the line are big men because they would dominate the paint, they wouldn't be able to shoot. So it really wouldn't matter like what you did with them. If they can't shoot, they can't convert those 2 points. Now with teams like figuring out that like, oh, we need to hit free throws, the rest of the defense isn't going to just allow you to take free throws, especially with players that live at the line like Joel Embiid, James Harden. They aren't going to try to foul any of them. Like, imagine back then, like if a player was able to manipulate the rules like how Harden was able to do it. Back then, I guarantee you a lot of players would come up with that defensive strategy of just trying not to foul him. Like, I feel like it's normal. And the fact that now zone defense is a thing in the NBA, I honestly think it's made it a little bit more difficult to score, because if you do not have a team that has shooters, then teams can go up and press you in a 2-3 zone and ultimately exploit your lack of spacing. Because in a 2-3, it's primarily meant to guard like in the painted area. And the reason why it wasn't a thing back then is because like so many teams would have abused that 2-3 defense to stop all of the big men that go in the paint, and they forced everyone to play man. And forcing everyone to play man, while it might sound like the defenses are much tougher, it's really not, because it's a lot easier to go by one defender than it is to go by 2 or 3, which is what a lot of players, and a lot of good players, I should say, are usually accustomed to seeing. Like, again, James Harden. Now, if 90s rules would be applied to James Harden, teams wouldn't be able to send a double team over to him unless like they fully commit. Like, they can't hedge a double team and force him to pass. They have to fully commit to that double. And with that in mind, and with how the spacing was back then, you were able to like afford to double team a specific player, because chances are most of the other players would try to get a little bit closer to the painted area, and since they're much more closer and the floor was a lot smaller, it becomes a lot easier for players to just go back out there and contest. Now with how the spacing is, because the spacing is a reaction to zone defense. Like, that's what spacing is. So the offense needed to adapt to the new defensive rule change. Like, that's how I see it, because if NBA players played man now, Luka Doncic and company would probably end up scoring way more points and end up producing a lot more, like, individually, as opposed to now where they have to, like, make the right reads and make the right play. Because as the best player now, that's sort of what you're expected to do. And back then, you didn't really have to do that. Like, the second you got by your defender, and the only reason why there was like legitimate help defense back then in the paint was not as sweet as as a lot of the older players would like to say. It's because there was no spacing. You remove that spacing, and chances are, and Michael Jordan would probably average 50 in that league, just because like all you'd have to do is just clear out everyone, make sure there's nobody in the paint, and once that happens, like, since defenders cannot play help defense, he's just gonna blow by every single defender every single time. And like, with how the skill gap was back then, no one was better than Michael back then, and no one was able to guard him one-on-one. Like, that's just known. Like, the defense back then, while there were some players that were, like, individually better at playing defense, it wasn't a majority of the NBA. And now zone defense has sort of allowed, and, like, help defense and rotations and things of that nature has sort of helped defenses get better, because now teams are able to, like, switch off of screens. And sometimes that would be beneficial, other times it really wouldn't, but forcing a player to fight through the screen, chances are that just creates an open shot more times than it would if the player were to just switch. And that switch would in turn cause the guard to needing to get past the center, this, that, and the other. And it could really go both ways. It's either the guard tries to isolate the center or the center tries to isolate the guard. It's one of two things. And you wouldn't be able to do that back in the NBA with how the defense was structured back then. So I actually think that it's both. Like, the defense didn't get worse. It got better, but the offense just got dramatically better as it responded to all of the defensive changes. And, like, there needed to be a shift in, like, the offensive game. And Curry, obviously, like, being the catalyst of all that thing. I think it's just a mixture of both. Like, both the defense got better and the offense just got better. It's just which one got more better is the real question, and that's offense. Offense ultimately became much better because now a lot of players are expected to do more for the team than to just fill in a role. So, like, Michael Jordan, like, he was obviously, like, their dominant scorer, but you wouldn't really ask him to do much other than score. Whereas, like, with now in the NBA, if you're the best player on the team, you're asked to be able to score, you're asked to be able to defend, and you're also asked to be able to create good shots for your team because you can get yourself open. And that's why zone defense, and that's why the help happens, because all of these players, they're just so good on offense now that you have to come over and help because they demand a double team, which in turn creates open looks for the others. And with the spacing being how it is, it's either you live with someone, with the best player taking the shot, or you live with someone else taking the shot. And most of the time, teams would rather someone else take the shot because it is a corner three. It is a much deeper shot than if they were to just blow by somebody in the paint, and it's less of a guarantee that they will even score those 3 points. So I think the defenses, they've gotten smarter. They haven't gotten worse. Now, lazier, that's a different topic. The defense might have most definitely has gotten a little bit lazier, but that's mainly because now, like, teams are sort of expected to make those rotations every single time up and down the court. That is a lot of running to tax on your players, not to mention also expect them to perform well offensively. Like, we'll just give LeBron James, for example. We see LeBron James, he's, like, very, very, like, when it's not the fourth quarter, his hustle on defense is very weak. And a lot of people say, like, oh, it's because he's lazy and he doesn't want to play defense. But in reality, it's because he has to focus on the offense because he is the team's, like, he's 9 times out of 10, he's the team's offense, and he's the reason why the team finds success. So there's more value to him on the offensive side of the ball than there is on the defensive side of the ball, meaning he needs to have his stamina ready so that way he can conduct the offense, especially, like, the fact that he's older now also doesn't help things. So that's sort of the reason why you don't see a lot of, like, star players try to rotate out there on defense, because that's a lot of running, and players will lose their breath because they're expected to run all around the court on defense with how all the rotations are and with the spacing, and then at the same time you expect them to come down the court and create a shot for themselves in isolation. Like, that just doesn't work. And it's like, that's way too much pressure on your lungs. And I understand that these are pro players and, like, they should expect that. But, like, as a human being, that takes a toll on you. And it's like, you can only run for so much. You can only run for so long and not get tired. Obviously, like, you know, some players are built different. Some players, they just don't get tired and they will just continue to run around the court like a maniac, like Steph Curry. But other players aren't like that. Like, they don't have the lung capacity. People are different. And that's something that a lot of people that watch the NBA, they sort of forget that it's like, these guys are human too. These guys need to take a breather sometimes too. And they would rather get the possession over with than needing to play defense so that way they can go ahead and use their stamina on offense. And it's like, most of the time when you have a good offense, it projects on the well, I think it's more the other way around, actually. Scratch that. The better defense you have, the better your offense will be because you have more energy after getting a stop. But that's sort of like my opinions on, like, the defense and the offense in this league and which ones got, like, what got better. I think it's just a mix of both. So with that, we are out of time for this first segment. So now I will be going into the second segment where I talk about two things because, and I call it basketball buzz. So it's basically just where I talk about like the big news that's going on around basketball. Like usually, like if I can't fit it into one whole segment, I'll make it into two different types of topics and make it into one whole segment. So that's what I'm going to do right here, where I'm going to talk about Bronny entering the transfer portal as well as Julius Randle needing to undergo surgery. So I will be right back after this short break.
I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind? Please, Lord, give me a sign, a sign. I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind? Please, Lord, give me a sign, a sign.
I wanna be the greatest. Everybody on the fake shit. I look around and feel like everybody is the fakest. I make this every day and I'm impatient, hoping one day I blow up from the basement. Statement, the top is so vacant. I don't hear shit that I think is amazing. Waiting for my day when I'm playing sold out shows for 1,000 faces. Hey, give me that crown. Get in my way and to be put down. It ain't your place, all this my town. If I want that shit, then I'll get it right now. I'm losing it, the noose it fits. I'm losing shit, a stupid myth. You choose to live or choose to dip. You choose to fight or lose your grip and lose a gift. Oh.
I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind? Please, Lord, give me a sign, a sign. I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind?
And we are back with the second segment of the GSMC Basketball Podcast, presented by the GSMC Sports Network. And in this second segment, we are going to be talking about, as a whole, we're going to be doing this new topic that I call Basketball Buzz, where I just like tell all the big stories that's been going on around basketball, whether it's NBA or just basketball in general. So I'm just going to go ahead and talk about the two big stories, one that happened recently and one that's been happening over the course of this week. But before I begin, I like to remind everybody to please remember to use the link in the description to get your comments recognized, or the link displayed below the ticker on every single show segment. That is GSMCPodcast.net. Really helps the show, makes the show much more interactive between myself and you guys. Once again, the link is GSMCPodcast.net. And with that out of the way, let's get into some of the basketball buzz that's been happening this week. So the first thing that we have is Bronny allegedly entering the transfer portal. Now, I say allegedly because LeBron James recently just said that he had no idea where that rumor even came from. And his further comments are that Bronny is a grown man and he can make that decision, or he's going to make that decision himself. And whichever decision he chooses, like as a family, like they're going to support him, obviously. You know, like LeBron's just being a good dad. So I think this rumor, it sort of started when, it started recently this week, but I think it started mainly because like Bronny's draft stock is not as high as a lot of people thought that it was. Like, I'm not even going to lie to you, this draft class is probably one of the weakest draft classes that I've ever seen. And this might be recency bias talking because, like, in the previous draft class, we had Victor Wembanyama, and he was the talk of literally the entirety of the summer. Like, everyone was just saying, oh my God, he's going to ruin the league. He's going to destroy everyone. Like, he's obviously going to be first overall, yada, yada, yada. all of that stuff. And it's all been proven to be true. Like, I knew from day one he was going to be a problem in this league. But a lot of people didn't believe that. A lot of people thought there was actually debate on who was going to win Rookie of the Year and, like, who was going to be the best rookie of that draft class. Everyone assumed that Scoot Henderson was going to be the best player from that draft class. And so far that has been proven completely untrue. And a lot of people also thought that Chet was going to win Rookie of the Year just because of his, like, efficiency and, like, the fact that he wins. And it's like, that's not what Rookie of the Year is. Like, you're describing MVP. And even with that, like, there's already an MVP candidate on the OKC. So he's out of the picture with that one. But, yeah, so he's entering the transfer portal. And he's, as a college player, he definitely, like, he doesn't have, like, on the offensive side of the ball, his production is not as strong as what many people thought. And part of that is because, like, he is LeBron James' son, and there's a lot of pressure and expectations that need to be met when you are LeBron James' son. And he just did not meet those expectations. But I don't really blame him. A lot of people forget that he had heart problems before the season, and we weren't even sure if he was going to even return to playing basketball. So the fact that he was even playing at a college level already impressed me. Now, it's not LeBron bias. I know everyone's going to think, like, oh, he's a LeBron fan, so he's obviously going to be biased. Like, no. Genuinely, when anyone, like, suffers from either cardiac arrest or suffers from major heart problem, you don't really expect them to come back and play that same year or, like, even play nearly as good as, like, is expected of them. And the fact that he was even able to play, I think, is just an accomplishment in of itself. And he's very good on the defensive side of the ball. It's just the offensive production that he's lacking in. And he already has half the game. Like, and that's a big half of the game that a lot of teams find value in because defense is sort of like, it's not really considered as valuable now. So when you have that player that really specializes on defense, it's a lot of teams really like that and a lot of teams really value that. And wouldn't be surprised if they end up drafting Bronny. Obviously not now, but like in the future, regardless of how he pans out, whether he turns into like the same scorer as LeBron is, whether he isn't as much of a scorer, I do think that he's going to end up getting drafted. Now, his draft stock did take a hit, which is partly why the rumor started to spread because, like, oh, he's not going to be a high pick in the draft, so he's not going to want to even participate in the draft and things of that nature. Like, that's the rumor. It's just a rumor because, like, it hasn't really been confirmed yet. It's only been confirmed by, like, reports. It wasn't confirmed by Bronny himself yet. And I'm curious as to, like, why. Like, I don't understand why his draft stock went down because LeBron James has always said he wanted to play with his son. And, like, that was his main goal. And that was, like, that's sort of, like, that's the idea. And that's, like, the hope if he can continue, like, to keep playing well and keep playing at 100%. Like, that's what he wanted. He wanted to play with his son. So why isn't the logic, like, okay, if you draft Bronny, then you get LeBron? Like, where's the logic in that? Like, why haven't people thought of that? Like, when you draft Bronny, you immediately become a favorite for LeBron because LeBron wants to play with that team because it's the team that has his son. So why aren't teams trying to draft them in hopes of getting LeBron James in that lineup? I mean, it's LeBron James, and he's still playing the best basketball. Why wouldn't you want a completely capable LeBron on your team? I don't know. And that's literally, like, the only reason why I would draft him. Like, apart from his defense, which I said was really good, I'm looking at the fact that I could potentially get LeBron. And if I can't get LeBron, then that means they're going to try to force a trade. And who knows, maybe he'll trade away Anthony Davis just to play with LeBron, just to play with Bronny. Who knows? Like, I don't know where LeBron's mindset is at right now, and I don't think he would trade Anthony Davis. But if it means playing with his son, then you never know. I mean, I leave everything on the table until it's certain. So that's a possibility, and I wouldn't put it past any organization to sort of expect, like, okay, if we draft Bronny, then we're going to eventually draft LeBron. But that's sort of been the buzz around Bronny in the transfer portal. Now there's recent news surrounding Julius Randle and the New York Knicks. Julius Randle, he is going to undergo surgery after he was trying to make his recovery in hopes of playing for the Knicks this season going into the playoffs. So I thought for all this time he was just rehabbing, and he was eventually going to be back either in a week before now or 2 weeks before now. That was my thought in the beginning. But it seems that this injury is a bit more severe than what I thought, and he is going to have to undergo surgery over the off season, and I guess he just found out that there's no way that he's going to be able to play at 100% for the Knicks in the playoffs. And I don't know why he didn't try to get the surgery earlier to get it repaired, because maybe if he got it earlier and he spent the time now to recover, things could have played out differently and he could have returned for the postseason. But I don't know the severity of the injury, so I have no idea. Maybe they thought that he would be able to recover just fine, and he just hasn't been recovering as well as they thought. Who knows what was going on over there? But now I think this is the time where the Knicks have to go and panic. This is the time to hit the panic button, because I thought that Julius Randle was going to be fine for the playoffs, and that was the production that they needed. Now they're not even going to have that production. So now it's time to hit that panic button. The rest of the Knicks, they need to find that offensive production in the rest of the bench that they were able to get, and they need to apply that right now. This instant now. Because if they do not get that bench rolling and they do not get the rest of those players consistent before the playoffs, they're not going to get consistent during the playoffs. They're the Knicks. And one of the things that I know it's a joke that the Knicks they're just a loser, they're just a losing franchise, and it's they never go far in the playoffs, this, that, and the other. But a lot of people don't really ask why. And there is a lot of pressure being a New York Knick, and there is a lot of pressure playing in the Garden. Any other player loves playing in the Garden, and they always have their best career games in the Garden, like Reggie Miller when he eliminated the Knicks in the playoffs and scored 8 points in literally 9 seconds, however long that was. Michael Jordan, when he changed his number to 45, he put on a show, 6 games just coming back from baseball. Kobe Bryant, he also put on a show, dropping 61 points. Carmelo Anthony, he also put on a show. While he was playing for the Knicks at that time, he still did, he put on a show. And James Harden, he also put up 62 points at one point and also put on a show when he played in the Garden. And you have all of these players that, they stamp the Garden. They literally put the day that they play the Knicks on their calendar, and they get ready for that game because they know that it is their time to show out. That place is an attraction for tourists. It's an attraction for so many fans across the NBA, and it's always packed, and everyone always tries to make sure that they have a good game in that Garden. And people don't really think about the other side of what they have to deal with, the Knicks. The Knicks, they constantly have to deal with that thought in their head that, oh my God, this player is going to go off. It seems like every single game that they play at home is a playoff game because every other team tries ridiculously hard to play very good in the Garden. And that takes a toll, and that's going to sort of I don't want to say, it's going to wear out some of these players because constantly expecting to play a playoff game every single day it's not healthy, and it's not going to be good for the team where it's sometimes they need sometimes you need games where you can relax, and the Knicks, they'll never be able to relax because every single time they're sort of they're always expecting that someone else is going to have a ridiculous performance. And then once they get into the playoffs, the rest of the crowd gets in their head because it is a very loud arena to play in, and with all of those people shouting, it's just a lot of pressure. Julius Randle was unable to handle that pressure in his first postseason run with the Knicks, where he got eliminated by the Atlanta Hawks, and Trae Young completely shut that place down, and Julius Randle was nowhere to be found in that series. And it's just the pressure of being a Knick, I feel like it got to him. And it didn't get to Brunson, however, because Brunson, he's made out of sterner stuff playing with Villanova. But that's my opinions on the Knicks and why they can't really seem to make it far. It's just too much pressure the rest of the year. And they definitely of all the teams, they have the most pressure because media coverage is always on them. They're literally in New York. And it's like, if they play bad, then the New Yorkers are going to talk bad about them. It's the same deal with Philly and things of that nature. If you play bad in Philly, regardless what team you play for, you're going to get a lot of hate from their fans. It's incredibly toxic. And while I might not agree with it, that's sort of the burden of what it takes to be a Knick. It's the burden of what it takes to be a Sixer. It's the burden of what it takes to be a Giant, an Eagle, all of those kinds of things. It's way too tough. And don't even get me started on the Cowboys because we know how tough it is. And the same thing really applies to Boston, and that's sort of the reason why I feel like Boston collapses in the playoffs. Because that pressure of needing to win all those championships and this and that and the other, it just gets to them. And the expectations, it also gets to them. Because they're expected to be the best franchise in the NBA. And here they are losing and things of that nature. But that's the basketball buzz that's going around this week. So with that, we are out of time for the second segment. So I will go ahead and go into the third segment where I give a quick recap of all the NBA games that went down yesterday. So stay tuned after this short break.
Looking for your daily fix of sports talk without having to pay for it? GSMC Sports Network is available on YouTube. Just search GSMC Sports Network. Get your fix of daily sports talk shows on YouTube, absolutely free. NFL, college football, NBA, MLB, MMA, UFC, fantasy football, and so much more. GSMC Sports Network has shows running all day long, with new sports shows starting every 2 hours. Just like on your favorite cable sports channel, except GSMC Sports Network is absolutely free. Just search GSMC Sports Network on YouTube to catch one of your new favorite shows, like the GSMC College Football Podcast, Chip Shot Football Podcast, Hoops and Heels Women's Sports Podcast, GSMC Basketball Podcast, and so many more. Check it out for yourself. GSMC Sports Network, now available on YouTube absolutely free. Search GSMC Sports Network on YouTube right now.
And we are back with the third segment of the GSMC Basketball Podcast presented by the GSMC Sports Network. And in this third segment, we are going to be looking at the rest of the games that went down last night and what the rest of if there's any other team that I didn't cover, what their playoff aspirations are looking like now, and, an update on the standings if I need to, this, that, and the other. You guys know how this goes. So first game on this list is yours truly. Actually, you know what? We're not even going to start with the Lakers. We're going to start with the Brooklyn Nets winning literally the most meaningless game of the entire season because the Nets just got eliminated from play-in contention. And now they decide to win. Why couldn't this happen any sooner? I don't know. But they beat the Pacers 115-111. And Cam Thomas, as I said previously, he ended the game with 27 points. Mikal Bridges ended the game with 17 points. Claxton ended the game with 14 points and 13 rebounds. And Schroeder ended the game with 12 points and 11 assists. So pretty good scoring coming in from the rest of the team. Noah Clowney ended the game with 22 points. I believe, yes, he did come off the bench. And he ended the game with 22 points and 10 rebounds. So great production coming in from him. The shooting on the Nets, not really that good. But then again, nothing about the Nets is really that good. And it's just really, really sad because I thought that this Nets team was going to be like a play-in team over the Hawks, especially with Trae Young getting injured. But no, the Nets have to get worse. Out of nowhere, they have to get worse. But I digress. I'm not even going to talk about the Nets and their situation or any of the players. I know you guys know exactly who I'm going to bring up, who I want to bring up but don't want to bring up. Tyrese Halliburton, he ended the game with 24 points and 8 assists. Pascal Siakam ended the game with 26 points. And that was basically it for the scoring for the Pacers. They shot very inefficient going up against this Brooklyn Nets team. They took 38 threes and only made 10 of them for a whopping 26% from three. This has been the problem for the Pacers, just not being able to have defense to rely on when your offense just isn't performing. And that's going to be a struggle for this team going into the postseason because you need to have both, especially if you want to win now when you're competing against a team like the Boston Celtics. It's like you can't afford to not have both in this stage in the game now. And it's really, I think it's going to be their downfall. The fact that they just don't have defense and sometimes their offense is like here and there. Like, there's no way to consistently have a good offense. Defense is always going to be more consistent than offense. And I feel like teams should just rely on that more going into the playoffs as opposed to their offense, even though I do think they should rely on their offenses just as much. But defense is going to play a heavy factor in these games, and it's especially going to play a heavy factor in the latter half of of the series where it's like down to the final minutes and it's like a stop is what determines whether you make it or you don't. So next game on the list is the Lakers going up against the Warriors. The Lakers, I believe they've won 9 out of their last 10 games, and they're now 44-33 as a whole. Yet they're still in the 9th seed, so unfortunate for that. Anthony Davis, 35-18, like I mentioned previously. D'Angelo Russell ended the game with 18. Austin Reeves ended the game with 16, and Roy Hachimura ended the game with 19. So the starting lineup isn't a problem for this Lakers team. It's the rest of the players that end up getting minutes after the starting lineup that's a problem. So just reading off of the scores for the bench, Spencer Dinwiddie ended with 4 points, Taurean Prince ended the game with 5, and Jackson Hayes ended the game with 3. And literally only 3 players scored coming off the bench, and they had 5 players come off the bench. So that is not good, like, for the Lakers, because while you do need offense and defense, having a good bench also helps in the postseason because that relieves a lot of stress from your star players. Like, if you look at how the Warriors won in 2022, they had Steph Curry, and then at the same time, they had Jordan Poole coming off of the bench to help Steph Curry. And even in their championships, like before, they had a ridiculous starting lineup, but they also had Iguodala coming off of the bench, and they also had Sean Livingston coming off of the bench. They had great players coming off of the bench, and sometimes, like, the bench players are the make or break for a team because you never know when any of these bench players are just going to go off. And the fact that these Lakers, they don't have a good bench, it just puts more pressure on the starting lineup and in turn puts more pressure on LeBron and Anthony Davis. And I think that's a recipe for disaster. Jordan Poole ended the game with 29 points. Kyle Kuzma ended the game with 17 and 12. So, let's see. Corey Kispert ended the game with 17 as well. And Tristan Vukovic, again, forgive me if I botched that last name, he ended the game with 15 points. So, scoring wasn't bad for Washington. It just wasn't good enough to stop the Lakers and their scoring. So really don't need to talk much about this game. I mean, it was just a basic matchup where it's like, the better team ended up winning against the worst team and the team that's tanking. So it's not that much of a surprise when you think about it. So don't need to touch on that game that much. The Trailblazers ended up playing the Hornets in literally the most 90s score I've ever seen, 89-86. They ended up winning. Barely any scoring coming in from either side. So relatively not a fun game to watch if you were tuning into that game. Jabari Walker ended the game with 14 points and 22 rebounds. DeAndre Ayton ended the game with 24 and 16. Scoot Henderson ended the game with 22 and 10. And that was basically it in terms of scoring coming in from the Blazers. And the rest of the team shot horribly from the field. They shot 39% as a team and 26% from three as a team. That is really bad. And I'm surprised that they ended up winning, but the Hornets shot way worse than them. And Brandon Miller ended the game with 21 points. And that was literally the only player that was standing out for the Charlotte Hornets. Everyone else was meh. And he didn't even shoot that well either. Brandon Miller shot 9 for 20 from the field and 1 of 8 from 3. And the whole team only hit 5 3-pointers that night, and they took 31 of them. That is 16%. So that's definitely not going to win you any games in this league right now. So it makes sense why the scoring was so low. And both of these teams, they're really, really bad. And I don't know what trajectory the Hornets are looking to go at, and I don't know what trajectory the Blazers are looking to go at. I mean, the Hornets head coach is going to step down from his position, so maybe with a change of coaching, the team is going to find a better culture, but again, it just doesn't look like there's much hope for that team. Now, next game on this list is the Hawks going up against the Pistons. Not really much that needs to be said about this game. The Pistons, they're known for being a terrible, terrible team. But they miraculously had Malachi Flynn end the game with 50 points. And that was the only thing that was outstanding for this Detroit Pistons team. He ended up outscoring the entire starting lineup. That is really, really bad if you're the Pistons, if you have one player just completely outscoring your entire starting lineup. And with Jaden Ivey shooting 3 of 15 from the field. Good Lord. And if it wasn't for that 50-point game, this game would be a blowout. Because looking at the rest of the box scores of this one, Jalen Johnson, I brought him up earlier, ended the game with his first triple-double, 28, 14, and 11. DeAndre Hunter ended the game with 26. DeJounte Murray ended the game with 24 and 11. Bogdanovich ended the game with 10. And Clint Capella ended the game with 11 and 16. So much better scoring overall, as a team compared to the Pistons, and obviously it makes sense that they were able to come out in the end because they're just the better team that night. Now the big games, I'll save the rest of the games when I'm skimming through them, but these two big games, the Celtics going up against the Thunder, the Celtics ended up winning 135-100 against the Thunder. Now I've said previously that the Thunder, they are the matchup that you want to play going into the playoffs. They did not have Shai Gilgeous-Alexander in this game, but I don't really think his production would have mattered that much because the rest of the players for Boston, individually at least, they did not really play that well, except for Porzingis. The rest of the players, they were a little bit meh, but it was still a good team effort, and with that team effort, I don't think the Thunder would have had enough firepower with Shai to be able to stop them. So this moves the Celtics up to getting 60 wins, and they now hold the record for the most 60-win seasons in NBA history. And now the expectation is that they make the finals, but we'll see how that works. Now, this other important game, the Bucks went up against the Grizzlies. Now, the Bucks, they did not have Damian Lillard, and it's a bit of an anomaly because, for some reason, when Dame plays with Giannis, his numbers aren't good, at all in the slightest. He plays better without Giannis. But then, when you take him out of the rotation, it seems since he plays better without Giannis, it seems like he's more hurting the team whenever he plays these games and Giannis is on the floor. But when he sits out, the Bucks only have won one game without Dame. And it's very weird because it's like on paper he's valuable, but it's like when you see him play with the whole team, it looks like he hurts the team a little bit more, especially with his shooting. Like, he hurts the team more with his shooting than it does helping, but that doesn't translate in the record. It's a weird anomaly, and they lose to the Memphis Grizzlies, who are a rebuilding team and are prone to injuries. Like, this is really, really bad news for the Bucks, and I'm probably going to do another segment just, like, wrapping up the entire Doc Rivers experiment, because right now Doc Rivers and the Bucks are 15-15 compared to when Adrian Griffin was on the team, was the coach of the team, where they were 30-13. So obviously they played more games, did not get nearly as many losses. There's a problem with Doc Rivers coaching. Like it or not, there is a problem. But well, the rest of these games, I'll go through them quickly because we are running out of time. The Orlando Magic ended up beating the Pelicans. Orlando Magic. And there's not really much that needs to be said about this game. They both have the same record. CJ, he went off 36-10, and Paolo Banchero went off 32-6-4. So we'll see how these teams do in the playoffs. Again, I feel like these teams are going to be one and done depending on their matchups. So next game, Timberwolves, they completely destroy the Raptors, 133-85. Don't really need to talk much about this game because, like, the Timberwolves, they are fighting for the 1 seed in the West, while the Raptors, they are busy tanking. So no need to cover that. And the Cavs, they matched up against Phoenix, and Phoenix absolutely obliterated them with Darius Garland and Donovan Mitchell in the lineup. Now, Devin Booker ended the game with 40 points. Kevin Durant ended the game with 32 points. And at halftime, the score was 47-72 in favor of the Suns. So their offense was rolling tonight, and that's what makes this Phoenix Suns team very scary because their offense could be rolling on you on any given night. It's just the consistency of how often that offense rolls that's in question. And that's what we're going to be anticipating going into the playoffs. And do I think they're going to make it far? They'll make it to the second round. I don't think they'll make it farther than that. I'm sorry, Kevin Durant, he is not the playoff performer that everyone claims that he is. That might be an egregious hot take, but think of it this way. What has Kevin Durant done in the postseason without Golden State? Like, get rid of his rings with Golden State, get rid of his time with Golden State. What has he done in the postseason? He's lost in the finals. He lost way before that, the next year. Then he goes to blow a 3-1 lead in the Western Conference Finals. Then we don't count the rest of the Warriors years because I'm just saying hypothetically. Then he goes to Brooklyn, tries to form a super team there. That ends up failing due to injuries and Kyrie being a quack. And he loses in the second round. And in the next year, he plays horrible. He plays horribly against the Boston Celtics in the first round and ends up costing them the series in Game 2. Then, after that, he joins another super team, the Phoenix Suns, and then they do the exact same thing and lose in the second round. It's like just disappointment after disappointment after disappointment, and it's without those rings, he would be known as a playoff disappointment. That's just how it is. And I feel like those rings ridiculously overrate him. That's just my take on it. But with that, we are out of time for this third segment. So now I will go ahead and go into the fourth segment where I actually talk about hot takes from a YouTube video that I watched. So I will be right back after this short break.
For the best and latest podcasts available anywhere, go to the podcast app on your cell phone and type in GSMC to access free content-rich podcasts on health and wellness, book reviews, sports, entertainment, relationships, social media, movies, technology, finance, and even weird news. Subscribe and download the GSMC Podcast Network's family of shows, available everywhere podcasts are found.
And we are back with the fourth segment of the GSMC Basketball Podcast presented by the GSMC Sports Network. And in this fourth segment, we are going to be looking at hot takes from this YouTuber. I'm sure you guys know him. He's Jimmy High Roller. He's one of the more popular basketball YouTubers that's out there, where he posts videos like time and time again, posting his opinions, posting ridiculous stats, this, that, and the other. And he just recently posted a video where he gives his own hot takes. Now, usually he's more accustomed to looking at hot takes and analyzing them as opposed to him like giving his own hot takes. So this is the first time where he is sort of giving hot takes, and I'm just going to give like my overall opinions on this, whether I agree with it, whether I don't agree with it, this, that, and the other, and all of that. So first hot take he has is that Tim Duncan is slightly overrated. So in the video, I'm not going to like say everything that happens in the video, but in the video he mainly highlights how Tim Duncan, throughout his retirement, has slowly but surely creeped up into top 5 or top 3 rankings. Like, if you ask and if you look at like social media comments and this, that, and the other, a lot of people will say, and like they'll defend Tim Duncan as like Tim Duncan is like he's the big fundamental best power forward of all time, and all of that is true, but is he top 5? I don't think so. And a lot of people, like, I somewhat agree with this take. Like, I somewhat agree with this take. I do think that Tim Duncan has become just slightly overrated by the media, simply because of his accolades and his accomplishments. And when you look at his accolades and his accomplishments, it makes sense, and it sounds like egregious to say that like he's overrated, because he is a 5-time champion, he is a 15-time All-Star, he's made the All-Defensive team several times, and he's won the MVP as well as Finals MVP a couple of times. So really, like, his accolades, like, when you look at them, they look like top 5 player, especially when you consider how he was one shot away from going 6-0 in the finals, which was the record that a lot of basketball players tried to set, because Michael Jordan set that 6-0 finals record standard. And like, obviously when you look at that, like, it would make sense, but you also you can't just take part of the context. You have to take the context entirely as it is. And Tim Duncan, when he was on the Spurs, was he ever talked about while being on the Spurs? Like, you never heard Tim Duncan in the Spurs. You always heard the Spurs. The Spurs were a ridiculously good franchise, and they had a winning culture around the team. They had a great offensive system as well under Pop, and those were, along with the Hall of Famers that they had on the roster, that was a big reason as to why they had as much success as they did. And it wasn't just primarily Tim Duncan; it was the rest of the squad that was doing not all of the work, because Tim Duncan, he did his role to the best of his ability, and he was by far their best player. But as a team and as the system, they all played within the system. Like, they had that understanding there was no I in team. And with that in mind, I think it's a little bit unfair to have him in the top 5 when you take all of that into account. Because other power forwards like Dirk and Kevin Garnett, they never had the benefit of playing within that system. I'm not saying that Tim Duncan is a system player, but throughout his career, he's found his success through the Spurs and their system. And he's played with countless Hall of Famers. He's played with David Robinson. He's played with Tony Parker. He's played with Manu Ginobili. He's played with Kawhi Leonard. Sometimes all at the same time he played with them. And obviously, with a squad like that, and with the system that they were running, it makes sense that they were going to find success. And it wasn't like he was carrying the team. The team was carrying itself. And I feel like now, with where the Spurs are now under Popovich, and how they've been one of the worst teams in the league since Tim Duncan and like all those other players they left, it's sort of like flipping the script a little bit And a lot of people now are sort of thinking, Tim Duncan must have been that guy, because since he retired, the Spurs haven't been nearly as good. And it's like, it's putting that perspective on it. But back then, if you said that Tim Duncan was better than Shaq, you were crazy. If you said he was better than Kobe, you were out of your mind. And if you said he was better than Kareem, you need to go into a mental institution. Like, that was back then. And now he's slowly just creeping up. And like, I get Jimmy High Roller's take on this, and I somewhat agree with it. So the next hot take he has is LeBron makes situations worse. And I'll elaborate on exactly like what that is. Now, he mainly highlighted his time with the Miami Heat. Like, he doesn't understand why he left the Miami Heat in 2014. He says that, well, like, it's sort of like, it's not really obvious, but when you think about it, it sort of is obvious. So D. Wade was getting a little bit older. The Cavaliers had the cap space, and they also had a better, much younger guard in Kyrie Irving at the time. I'm not saying that Kyrie was better than D. Wade, but at the time, Kyrie was a better guard to have than D. Wade. And he decided to go, well, that's the thought process. He decided to go over there because that seemed like a better opportunity for him. But when you look at the Heat now and what they've been doing, like, as a team, you sort of have to wonder, like, what would happen if LeBron had stayed? Maybe his career would have been better, or maybe it would have panned out a little bit different. But here's my take on that. I don't think that LeBron would nearly get as much respect as he does now if he didn't win a championship in Cleveland. And, like, if he would have stayed on Miami, everyone was just going to remember him as, like, he would have literally just been Kevin Durant, if anything. Like, people would have remembered him for only winning, like, with that ridiculous Miami team, and they wouldn't remember him for, like, redeeming himself and this, that, and the other. So him going back to Cleveland, it sort of altered his it would alter his legacy, because he would ultimately bring the championship that was sort of promised when drafting him. And without that, I don't think, and without beating the Warriors after coming back from a 3-1 lead, I don't think that LeBron's legacy would have been any better. It might have even been worse, honestly. But that's a completely different conversation. He also highlighted how when he thought the Cavs weren't good enough in 2017-18 season, 2017-18 season, he didn't really think that the Cavs were a good enough roster. So what he did was he decided to blow up that roster entirely and just start from scratch, essentially. Like, that was his thought process in the 2018 season, to just start from scratch in the middle of the season. And right after that, he decides to leave just to go to the Lakers. And I don't really know how I feel about that. Like, because when I think about it, it's like that Cleveland team, like, before he made the changes, it was full of older players that weren't that good. They were past their prime. But it was full of old players that were good, but it wasn't full of enough role players. And I think LeBron sort of realized that going into the postseason, and that's why he decided to blow up the roster and only keep a few and add a little bit, and add a few players, because there wasn't enough role players for him to be able to do what he did. And I mean, it ultimately led to him going to the finals. So obviously, like, off of, like, his back and off of the will of his offense. But I don't really look at it as LeBron trying to just, he destroys the team and then he immediately leaves, because that's what he's sort of trying to portray it as, where, like, he completely blew up the roster, made a whole new roster, and then ditched that roster the next year to go to the Lakers. And then he brings up the championship with LeBron when he won in 2020. Instead of running it back with the same team, the Lakers decide to implode the lineup and create a whole new team. And he says that he obviously, like, it's known, these type of decisions, they don't happen without LeBron's okay. But you also have to understand that LeBron isn't the one making these moves. This is the organization giving suggestions to him and him giving them the okay. The organization could say no for all they care. But he's making it seem like LeBron is just chasing. And I think that's just a bad portrayal, because when LeBron waited for the organization to do its job in his first stint in Cleveland, it didn't work out. So his response to that is just, fine, I'll do it myself. And that's what he's been doing the rest of his career. Like, you can't really fault him at that, just because he just like moves, it seems that he moves on to the next shiny thing. He wants to win. And the organization, like, as history has shown, is not going to give it to him. So he has to find it himself. And that's what I see it as. I don't really see it as him leaving the team and trying to go win somewhere else, just abandoning them completely. Like, he left for a reason. That's my thought process behind it. And that decision to blow up the entire roster and bring in Russ, how was anybody supposed to know that Russ's production was going to fall off a cliff? How was anybody supposed to know that? Like, everyone was saying, like, okay, this is not a good fit. But in reality, it wasn't a good fit because the rotations weren't there. The rotations, like, for the team in the starting lineups, they just weren't there, and they did not help Russ. Like, it could have worked. It's just, it didn't. And part of that is because of how bad Russ really was. Like, a lot of people don't understand, like, just the problems that Russ brings, and they only see, like, the good that he brings in his stat hunting. But in reality, that stat hunting, it doesn't lead to wins. And I knew that was going to be a problem with the Lakers, because Russ was going to be busy stat hunting, when in reality, the rest of the team is expecting him to try to play to win. And it wasn't going to work, not because it was a bad system, but because it was Westbrook that they got. Like, I'm not a big fan of Westbrook, simply because I'm a big fan of him. I'm not a big fan of his fans. I'm gonna redirect that statement. I'm not a big fan of the fans of Westbrook. I do like Westbrook, and I think he's a phenomenal athlete, and he's a great player. But his fans, they give him too much credit, where I feel like they don't need to give him that much credit. And it's like, with the way he plays, it was only going to hurt that Lakers team, because he constantly needs the ball in his hands to even be effective. And if he doesn't have the ball in his hands, he's not effective. On top of that, when he has the ball in his hands, he's turnover prone, and he's also prone to taking a bunch of bad shots, especially late in the fourth quarter, where he just can't help but just pull up a three for whatever reason. I don't understand what it is. He does this like once in a blue moon every single time in the fourth quarter. He just walks down the court, whoever's in his face, doesn't matter, he just throws the ball up. I don't understand why he does that, but he does that. And he has two modes. It's like, there's like two things that make him stand out. His motor and his hustle. He never stops playing hard on offense, and it could be fun for a while, except for when you realize that opponents want him to take every single shot because he cannot shoot. And then once we get rid of the scoring option, he's not really that good of a facilitator either. Like, he gets a lot of assists, but those cancel out when you take into account his turnovers, because it's like, sure, he's getting assists, but at the same time, he's just giving the ball back to the other team at the same amount of times that he's passing the ball to his own team. He's a good defensive rebound, but his rebounding totals are heavily inflated due to cherry-pick defensive rebounds. Like, he's a great rebounder for a guard, but since the rest of the teams, they run back on defense, that's a free defensive rebound for him. And, like, his triple-doubles, they just don't bring value. And the play style that he has, it's not winning basketball, unless it's coming off the bench when it's for the Clippers, where he can do whatever, like, where he can have the ball with that bench. And it's like, it wasn't going to work simply because it was Russ. If it was any other star, it probably would have worked. And then the last hot take, because we are running out of time, is that the corner shot is not the easiest shot to hit in basketball. So his thought process behind this is because the corner shot is exclusively for three-point shooters. 9 times out of 10, that is where the shooter is going to stand. He is going to stand in the corner, and his job is to wait until the help defense comes down and leaves him wide open, and then he knocks down the shot. That's the shot that every single offense looks for in the league now. And since that shot is reserved to the best of three-point shooters, it makes sense how the average three-point percentage in the corner is going to be higher than the average three-point percentage at the top of the key. Another point he brings up is that at the top of the key, that's where a lot of the best players on the team operate. They might not be the best shooters on the team, but they're the best players on the team. And so if the shot is open, 9 times out of 10, they are going to take it. So it makes sense how the percentage is lower because a lot of players that aren't really considered shooters are taking shots from out there. And the other thought process that he brought up is like just overall like experience and his experience on playing basketball. Like when you look at the corner and when you stand in the corner, at least like, because I can agree with him on this one. When you stand in the corner and you look at the hoop, it just looks more difficult to shoot from there than you would if you were standing from top of the key, because you have a much better perception of like the backboard and like where you have to like just aim the ball at in order to hit the shot. In the corner, it's much more difficult to do that, and that's why it's usually reserved to some of the best shooters in the NBA. And it makes sense. Like, obviously, I think numerically, I think that's the easiest shot because it is the closest three-point shot on the entire court. And when you practice it enough, it's like you're going to eventually hit a lot of those shots, especially like when you practice it religiously, like how a lot of these corner shooters practice it. So I feel like with all the repetition, the NBA has made it an easy shot. But in reality, like if you were to just take a shot from there, it's not an easy shot to hit. So I'm sort of in the mid-tier of that. I think it's when you practice, it's an easy shot to hit. But when you don't practice, it's not going to be an easy shot to hit. Because when you think about it, in the corner, like 9 times out of 10, that's literally the same shot every single time. And so you just have to remember that same motion where you made the shot, and you're going to make the other one when you step in for that corner three. So it's repetition, and it's the same shot that you're going to be accustomed to shooting every single time. Whereas opposed to if you're at the top of the key, you could be farther back from the three-point line. You could be closer to the three-point line. You could be more on the left. You could be more on the right. You could be off balance and things of that nature, which is another thing that I didn't bring up. The fact that a lot of these corner shots, they aren't off the dribble, and a lot of the shots at the top of the key, they are off the dribble, and they are mostly contested shots, which is why the three-point percentage at the top of the key is much lower than the three-point percentage in the corner, because in the corner, you're giving it to a shooter who is already set, ready to shoot, and who's most likely wide open. And all of these factors contribute to better three-point shooting percentages. So it makes sense, but I'm still sort of on that like mid-tier where it's like I think it's the easy shot, but I understand why other people might not think it's an easy shot. But with that, that is the end of the podcast, and that is the end of the 4th segment. So thank you for tuning in to the GSMC Basketball Podcast, presented by the GSMC Sports Network. Your support means a lot to us, so please remember to subscribe to the show and leave a positive review. It really does make a difference. We also invite you to follow us on Facebook, Twitter, TikTok, and Instagram for more content and updates. And as always, please remember to use the link in the description and the link displayed below the ticker on every single show segment to get your comments recognized. The link is GSMCPodcast.net. Really helps the show, makes the show much more interactive between myself and you guys. Once again, the link is GSMCPodcast.net. And that does it for the show today. I am your host, Nelson. Thank you guys once again. And as always, take care.
Let's go.
I wake up to a little bit of drool on my pillow, feel like it's gonna be a bad day. Yeah, I'm tired of shit, and the coffee ain't hit yet, damn.